You feel pain like no other pain. And you know that in your life, it's going to be very difficult too. Prince William believed every surviving word from his mother had already been examined, protected, and placed beyond the reach of palace politics. He was wrong. Inside a sealed archive box, officials discovered a private document carrying Diana's signature and one final message addressed directly to her sons. When William read its closing lines, he lowered the page, gripped the table, and realized his mother had feared the very division now defining their lives. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. William remained motionless as the meaning settled over him. Palace archivists had uncovered the envelope during a security review of private correspondence stored at Windsor. An archive is a guarded collection where important records are preserved. This message carried Diana's signature, her handwritten corrections, and a clear instruction. Both sons were to receive it once they were old enough to understand the burden waiting for them. The prince returned to the opening line, then forced himself toward the sentence that had broken his calm. Diana urged William to protect Harry, but she also warned him never to surrender his conscience. She asked the brothers not to let the crown, the authority and public duty attached to the monarch, turn love into rivalry. Reaching toward Harry could honor their mother, but risked accusations, private disclosures, and renewed conflict. William kept reading, and the message grew darker. Diana warned that powerful figures might someday encourage division, because two isolated brothers would be easier to guide, pressure, and control. Her documented words did not name those figures, but the warning felt disturbingly close to the life her sons were now living. One brother stood inside royal duty. The other had built his future far beyond it. Somewhere between them, silence had hardened into something neither man seemed able to cross. The senior archivist watched William reach the final page and quietly asked whether Harry should be contacted immediately. The prince placed the document flat against the table and studied the custody record attached to its cover. It proved the envelope had entered palace protection years earlier. Diana had intended her sons to receive it. Yet someone had repeatedly prevented that moment from happening. "Not until I know who kept this from us," William said. The archivist lowered his eyes as the prince traced an old reference number beside the final authorization stamp. That number connected Diana's message to an office still operating near the heart of royal authority. Her words had reopened William's grief, but their hidden history was about to force both brothers to confront the lives they had built without them. Diana's final message did not reach two frightened boys standing together behind their mother's coffin. It reached two grown men separated by an ocean, years of resentment, and words that could never be withdrawn. William carried the burden of becoming king. Harry carried the belief that the institution had abandoned him. Now their mother's voice had returned, asking each son to save a bond. Neither seemed certain could still be rescued. William understood why every choice now felt dangerous. As heir, the person expected to inherit the throne. He carried responsibilities extending far beyond his own feelings. His decisions affected Catherine, their children, and the stability of the monarchy he had spent years protecting. Calling Harry might reopen accusations, angry arguments, and private wounds. Staying silent, however, would repeat the very pattern Diana had warned against. Either choice threatened something the prince could not afford to lose. Harry faced a different struggle. The Duke had built a new life beyond royal control, yet his identity remained tied to his mother, his childhood, and the brother who had once shared his grief. Diana's documented message now spoke directly to that hidden conflict. She warned him not to mistake rebellion for freedom, because escaping an institution meant little if anger continued controlling his life. Those words threatened the story he had told himself for years. Catherine noticed the change before William said anything. She found him reading the same paragraph repeatedly, his fingers fixed against the edge of the page. The princess gently touched his shoulder and waited until he finally looked up. He admitted that Diana's words made him feel as though he had failed twice. first as Harry's brother, then as the future king expected to hold his family together. William walked toward the window without releasing the document. Catherine followed him, but did not press for details. She asked one quiet question. Did he want reconciliation, or did he simply want an explanation for everything that had happened? The prince stared ahead and confessed that he no longer knew whether the two could be separated. Understanding Harry might require forgiveness, but forgiveness could demand more trust than either brother still possessed. The message then delivered its most painful instruction. Diana had written separate lines for each son, but a handwritten edition declared that they must hear her final words together. Sending Harry a copy would violate that request. Delaying contact would deepen the secrecy surrounding it. William now faced a choice in which even the careful path felt Clear's throat, like betrayal. A palace aide entered moments later and handed him the archival record, a formal history showing when a document was received, restricted, and moved. William studied its first entry and suddenly went still. Diana's message had been logged immediately after a tense family meeting years earlier. To understand why her plea disappeared, William would have to return to the exact palace moment when silence became a deliberate choice. The disappearance of Diana's message was not caused by a misplaced box or a careless clerk. It began during one specific meeting when grief, royal caution, and fear of scandal collided behind a closed palace door. The brothers were still young. The monarchy was struggling to survive public anger, and senior figures believed they were protecting the future. But one decision made that afternoon would deny William and Harry the words their mother had left for them. William studied the newly recovered register and followed its entries back to the months after Diana's death. Her private correspondence had been divided between personal representatives, family custodians, and royal archivists. These archivists were officials responsible for protecting important royal records and controlling who could examine them. Letters involving her sons received additional security because palace advisors feared that painful family details could damage the boys or deepen public anger toward the monarchy. The register revealed something darker. Diana's final message had been placed under restricted classification, a security label that prevented ordinary staff or family members from accessing it without formal permission. Officials justified that restriction because the letter mentioned the crown, family division, and the emotional pressure surrounding William and Harry. Yet, the documented account showed that protection was not the only concern. Senior figures also feared what the message might make the brothers believe about palace influence. October 1997 became the turning point. A private secretary opened Diana's envelope during a closed meeting at St. James's Palace and read part of it aloud. The secretary served as a senior official who managed confidential communication for the royal household. One advisor immediately warned that the letter's criticism of outside control could turn the young princes against the institution. The room fell silent. Then the envelope was ordered into temporary sealed custody, meaning nobody could release it until another formal decision was made. Charles sat through that meeting carrying grief, guilt, and an impossible responsibility. Advisors told him that giving the message to William and Harry could intensify their anger while they were still struggling with their mother's death. He reluctantly permitted a delay. The king believed the restriction would last only until his sons were emotionally prepared. But no date was fixed, no review was scheduled, and temporary caution quietly became permanent silence. William felt his anger sharpen as he reached the final section. The archival sheet carried 3 authorization marks, yet one name had later been hidden beneath another security classification. Worse, someone had renewed the restriction after both brothers reached adulthood. The prince spread the register beside Diana's message and circled the renewal date. He recognized it immediately. That order had been signed during the same week he and Harry appeared united at a memorial ceremony honoring their mother. William closed the file and requested a private meeting with Charles. No secretaries, no advisors. The buried letter was no longer merely Diana's farewell. It was evidence the future king would carry into the most painful confrontation of his royal life. William entered the room carrying only 2 sheets of paper, but the weight between father and son was heavier than any state crisis. Charles saw Diana's signature before a single question was asked. For several seconds, neither man moved. Then the prince placed the document on the desk and demanded the truth. Had his father known that Diana's final message existed, while her son spent decades believing she had left no final words for them? Charles dismissed the last aide and closed the door himself. His private sitting room was normally a personal space for confidential conversations away from formal royal business. William had chosen it because he wanted no secretaries recording careful answers and no advisors softening painful truths. This discussion would remain between father and son. The king looked again at Diana's handwriting, lowered himself into a chair, and admitted that he remembered the 1997 meeting. William felt anger rise as his father explained what happened. Charles had been told that releasing the message immediately could deepen the boys' grief and turn their pain against the institution. He believed the restriction would end when they were older and emotionally ready. Yet adulthood had not healed either brother. The prince said it had merely taught them to hide their wounds while smiling through royal duty. The public work performed by members of the family on behalf of the monarch and country. Charles flinched at the accusation. William was no longer speaking to him as a future king, seeking an official explanation. He was speaking as a son who had been denied his mother's final words. The monarch admitted that fear had shaped too many choices after Diana's death. Protecting the institution had slowly become impossible to separate from avoiding grief, blame, and conversations nobody inside the palace wanted to face. The king then broke his silence through that private conversation and disclosed something William had never heard. Years after the original meeting, Charles had asked why the letter remained sealed. A senior official told him that Diana's personal representatives had withdrawn it from release. The newly discovered archive record proved that explanation was false. Her representatives had never requested withdrawal. William pushed the second sheet across the desk and pointed to the obscured authorization mark. Charles recognized it immediately. It belonged to a former senior courtier, a powerful palace advisor who worked behind the scenes to guide royal decisions. That official's office had retained influence long after the 1997 meeting, allowing the temporary restriction to survive without fresh approval. William shoved back his chair and walked toward the door. Charles called his name. The prince stopped but refused to turn. "I should have made certain you received it," the king said quietly. William left, knowing his father had made the first mistake. But someone else had deliberately kept that mistake alive. Charles's confession softened one wound, yet exposed a colder truth. An unelected palace hand had controlled Diana's voice long after her sons became men. The most powerful figure in this story was not the person who wrote the message, the sons who were meant to receive it, or even the king who failed to release it. Real control belonged to a quiet palace office, capable of locking away a private truth under the language of protection. As William followed the authorization trail, he discovered how fear of Diana's continuing influence had been transformed into procedure, signatures, and years of deliberate silence. William traced the renewed restriction to a former courtier who had controlled access to sensitive family correspondence and advised the household on threats to royal stability. A courtier was a trusted palace official who worked close to the monarch and could influence decisions without holding public authority. This man had not merely stored Diana's message. He had decided how her words might affect the monarchy, then used that judgment to keep them away from her sons. The prince felt betrayed by the system he was expected to inherit. That system demanded his loyalty, discipline, and silence. Yet, it had withheld something deeply personal while claiming to protect him. The former official had retired years earlier, but the restriction remained active because no later private secretary dared challenge it. A private secretary managed confidential royal business and could review sensitive decisions. In this case, every successor had allowed an old order to survive without asking whether it was still justified. Charles reacted with quiet shame when William showed him the renewed authorization. The king discovered that his authority had repeatedly been cited, even though he had never personally reviewed or approved the extension. His name had given the restriction weight, while his failure to question the process had allowed others to control Diana's voice. He had made the first mistake. The office had turned it into policy. Catherine then noticed a second envelope number hidden beneath a handwritten correction. The princess compared it with the archive register and discovered that Diana's message originally contained an accompanying page. That page was missing. Its entry described it as personal instructions, suggesting it might explain when, where, and under what conditions the brothers were meant to receive the letter. William found another disturbing clue inside a memorandum, a formal internal note used to record palace reasoning. It argued that releasing Diana's words might encourage her sons to place personal loyalty above constitutional responsibility, meaning their duty to protect the monarchy's rules and stability. The statement twisted a mother's plea for unity into a threat against the crown. The archive chamber offered no answers. William watched the current custodian unlock a narrow drawer, where the second folder should have been stored. Inside sat only a faded card bearing 3 words, removed by authority. The prince set it down and demanded a complete custody search. Before officials could begin, Harry received a call from a private contact. He learned that Diana's message had been found and that William had still not contacted him. The palace had controlled the secret for decades. But the moment the Duke felt excluded again, control began slipping from everyone's hands. Harry did not first hear Diana's words from his brother. He heard that they existed from someone outside the room where the decisions were being made. That detail struck him with almost as much force as the hidden message itself. To him, the discovery confirmed an old fear. When the palace faced a dangerous truth,